Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing our series on Ralph Waldo Emerson. We are on his journals, and we are up to the year 1840 when the writer was 37 years old. We are, midway through that year. We're picking up on July 13th with that entry, and with that said, I will go ahead and read it. The graces of sleep, not 3, but 3,000. No man is ever awkward, ever sly, canting, or otherwise false whilst asleep. Only one thing they do amiss, the sleepers. Then there's a dash with the letters SN, followed by another dash with an E and then a period. I don't know what that means or how it's supposed to be pronounced or if it's supposed to be pronounced. So I'm just referencing that it's there in case someone's reading along and can make something out of it that I can't. But with that said, I'll keep going. Carlyle shall make a statement of a fact, shall draw a portrait, shall inlay nice shades of meaning, shall play, shall insinuate, shall banter, shall paralyze with sarcasm, shall translate, shall sing a tertian song, and speak out like the liturgy or the old English Pentateuch, all the secrets of manhood. This he shall do, and much more, being an upright, plain-dealing, hearty, loving soul of the clearest eye and of infinite wit, and using the language like a protean engine, which can cut, thrust, saw, rasp, tickle, or pulverize as occasion may require. But he is not a philosopher. His strength does not lie in the statement of abstract truth. His contemplation has no wings. He exhausts his topic. There is no more to be said when he has ended. He is not suggestive. Every new history that shall be written will be indebted to him. It will not be stately, but will go now into the street and sitting room and the alehouse and kitchen. What he has said shall be proverb. Nobody shall be able to say it otherwise. It does not need that a poem should be long. Life, I have written above, is unnecessarily long, and poems are, as we learn when we meet with a line, quote, in the large utterance of the early gods, or Milton's, beyond the manhood of a Roman recovery, moments of personal relation, smiles and glances, how ample. Borrowers of eternity they are. Some mellow, satisfying sessions we have in the woods in cool summer days. Education aims to make the man prevail over the circumstance. The vulgar man is the victim of the circumstance. In the stagecoach he is no man, but a tedious echo of each new accident of the journey, absorbed in the heat, in the cold, in the bad horses, in the fret of a crowded carriage. In the rain he can think of nothing but that he wishes it would stop. In the drought he waits till the rain fall. In debt he postpones his being until his note is paid. In dull company until the company is gone, and never rallies himself to sink the circumstance and these encroaching trifles into their proper nothingness before the energies, the sweetness, the riches, the aspirations of a human mind. The common man has no time. One circumstance delivers him over to another. Now he cannot be, for he is traveling. Then he cannot be, for he has arrived in a new place, now because he labors, then because he rests. July 15th. Behavior. I like to see a man or a woman who does not palter or dodge, whose eyes look straight forward, and who throws the wisdom he or she has attained into the address and demeanor. What blandishment in the pronouncing of your name! Your name is commended to your ear ever after it has been spoken by a man like Otis or a woman like A-W-. July 17th. Quote, sunshine was he on the cold day, and when the dog-star raged, shade was he in coolness, says the Arabic poet translated by Goethe in Vol.6. The hottest weather so long continued that I have noticed red-hot noons. The mercury reached 93 degrees in the shade. The crops are drying up. Let me be coolness and shade. The gardener floods his vines with water out of the well, sure that the good rain will in the year fill his well. though it delays to feed his garden. So is he coolness and shade. In the winter he covers his asparagus with straw, and in the cold spring his young tomatoes with glass. So he is to them sunshine. But I weep with the weepers, and fear with the fearers, and am not a tower of defense, but a foolish sympathy. July 18th. 96 degrees Fahrenheit. What right has the man of genius to retreat from work and indulge himself? The popular literary creed is, I am a man of genius, I ought not therefore to labor. But genius is the power to labor better and more availably than others. Deserve thy genius, exalt it. The good, the illuminated sit apart from the rest, censuring their dullness and vices, as if they thought that by sitting very grand in their chairs, the very brokers and congressmen would see the error of their ways and flock to them. But the good, the wise, must learn to act and carry this very salvation to the brokers and demagogues which they need. July 26th. Beside the self-repose which manners express, the Alleghanies seem to me the drifting sand. Tantalus is but a name for you and me. Transmigration of souls, that too is no fable. Go to the forest, if God has made thee a poet, and make thy life clean and fragrant as thy office. True Brahmin, in the morning in meadows wet expound the Vedas and the violet. Thy love must be thy art, thy words must spring from love, and every thought be touched with love. Only such words fly and endure. There are two ways of speaking. One, when a man makes his discourse plausible and round by considering how it sounds to him who hears it, and the other, when his own heart loves and so infuses grace into all that drops from him. Only this is living beauty. Nature must also teach thee rhetoric. She can teach thee not only to speak truth, but to speak it truly. Only poets advanced with every word. In most compositions there is one thought which is spontaneous, and many which were added and abutted, but in the true God writes every word. Shall the scholar write every word in his mind? How bad as well as how good he is, like Rabelais and Goethe, or shall he be an eclectic in his experience? Is there not then Kant when he writes more chastely than he speaks, if you should hear his whispers? Let him then mend his manners and bring them within the mark which he trusts his pen to draw. I cannot travel with the parties of pleasure or with parties of business. The frivolous makes me lonely. Neither can I well go to see those whom I esteem, unless they also esteem me, for I can bestow my time well at home. I have thus found that I cannot visit anyone with advantage for a longer time than 1 or 2 hours. Love should always make glad, never gloomy. We talked of Deerbrook in these days. Miss Martineau's novel. It is a good book to read. There is much observation and much heroism in it, and people will be the better for reading. Yet the author is of that class who mistake a private for a universal experience and venture to record it. A perfectly sound nature may accept all his own experience for the uniform experience of mankind, and so record it. But a man partially sick may not. If he record his morbid passages, they will be accepted only by the sick for general truths. To the well they will be offensive. It is a delicate matter, this offering to stand deputy for the human race, and writing all one's secret history colossally out as philosophy. Very agreeable is it in those who succeed, odious in all others. It is good when one of these heroines remarks that all martyrdoms looked mean when they happened. It is ill when she suggested to a third person what her lover must have suffered on her account, for of that a woman can never say little enough. Character makes an overpowering present, a cheerful, determined hour which fortifies all the company by making them see that much is possible and excellent that was not thought of. July 31st. Talked with Elizabeth Hoare last night on Landor, whom I read for a few minutes yesterday. We agreed that here was a book of sentiment, Pericles and Aspasia, sentiment in the high and strict sense that one could hardly read it without learning to write with more elegance. The inimitable neatness of the sentences and then the wonderful elegance of suppression and omission which runs through it might polish a dunce. A newspaper in Providence contained some notice of transcendentalism, and deplores Mr. Emerson's doctrine that the argument for immortality betrays weakness. The piece seems to be written by a woman. It begins with round sentences, but ends in ohs and ahs. Yet cannot society come to apprehend the doctrine of one mind? Can we not satisfy ourselves with the fact of living for the universe, of lodging our beatitude therein? Patriotism has been thought great in Sparta, in Rome, in New England even, only 60 years ago. How long before universalism or humanity shall be creditable and beautiful? Editor's note: the first number of The Dial was issued in July, Miss Fuller being the literary editor and Mr. George Ripley the business manager. Mr. Cabot, in his Memoir of Emerson, Vol.2, pages 403 to 409, gives an interesting account of The Dial and Mr. Emerson's relation to it. End of editor's note. And now I think that our Dial ought not to be a mere literary journal, but that the times demand of us all a more earnest aim. It ought to contain the best advice on the topics of government, temperance, abolition, trade, and domestic life. It might well add to such compositions such poetry and sentiment as now will constitute its best merit. Yet it ought to go straight into life with the devoted wisdom of the best men and women in the land. It should it not, be a degree nearer to the hoediernal facts than my writings are. I wish to write pure mathematics, and not a culinary almanac or application of science to the arts. Every history in the world is my history. I can as readily find myself in the tragedy of the Atrides as in the Saxon Chronicles, in the Vedas as in the New Testament, in Aesop as in the Cambridge Platform or the Declaration of Independence. The good eye, the good ear, can translate fast enough the slight varieties of dialect in these cognate tongues. The wildest fable, the bloodiest tragedy is all too true. Let fiery hope nourish you in the angelic region. Zoroaster. August 9th. A man of genius or a work of love or beauty cannot be compounded like a loaf of bread by the best rules, but is always a new and incalculable result like health. Do not therefore rattle your rules in our ears. We must behave and do as we can. The ancients, the antique. I see all that is excellent under that name somewhat near to me. It is the genius of the European family. The discovery and the planting of America and the American Revolution in mechanic arts are Greek, Attic, antique in this sense as much as the Parthenon or the Prometheus chained. I can easily see in our periodical literature, for example, a diffused and weakened Athens. The poet cannot spare any grief or pain or terror in his experience. He wants every rude stroke that has been dealt on his irritable texture. I need my fear and my superstition as much as my purity and courage to construct the glossary which opens the Sanskrit of the world. C delights in the beauty of clouds, the shining people of the sky, and I felt that they, with their hard and fawn-colored surface and broad edges of glory, were the flowers of the upper element, and the fittest symbols in nature of an illustrious life. The clock by which we measured our stay in this field of outside and upside was one of these splendid clouds which lost its large dimension and nearly faded in the air whilst we stood. Editor's note. Here follows some verses from a poem by Mr. Wells. Quote, "My own delighted laughing boy," etc. End of editor's note. Love makes us little children. We never attain a perfect sincerity in our speech except we feel a degree of tenderness, and lovers use the monosyllables and the short and pretty speech of children. Love takes off the edges and the ceremonies of speech and says thee to one and you to many. Do not say things. What you are stands over you the while and thunders so that I cannot hear what you say to the contrary. August 16th. After seeing Anna Barker, I rode with Margaret Fuller to the plains. She taxed me, as often before, so now more explicitly, with inhospitality of soul. She and C would gladly be my friends, yet our intercourse is not friendship but literary gossip. I count and weigh, but do not love. They make no progress with me, but however often we have met, we still meet as strangers. They feel wronged in such relation, and do not wish to be catechized and criticized. I thought of my experience with several persons which resembled this, and confessed that I would not converse with the divinest person more than 1 week. M insisted that it was no friendship which was thus so soon exhausted, and that I ought to know how to be silent and companionable at the same moment. She would surprise me. She would have me say and do what surprised myself. I confess to all this charge with humility unfeigned. I can better converse with George Bradford than with any other. Elizabeth Hoare and I have a beautiful relation, not however quite free from the same hardness and fences. Yet would nothing be so grateful to me as to melt once for all these icy barriers and unite with these lovers. But great is the law. But the survey of my experience taught me anew that no friend I have surprises, none exalts me. This then is to be set down, is it not, to the requirements we make of the friend, that he shall constrain us to sincerity and put under contribution all our faculties. I read in Rabelais that Thomas Wallis, an English Dominican friar, published a book in which he spiritualized Ovid's Metamorphoses. August 18th. Gaston de Foix was a pleasant man, but he was no saint. He said that he had little faith in prayer and never used it but for one class of persons, namely his benefactors. Their chance, he thought, of any return for their kindness was so small that if there was a possibility that a prayer should be effective, these ought to have the benefit of it. September 1st. One fact the fine conversations of the last week, now already fast fading into oblivion, revealed to me, not without a certain shudder of joy, that I must think what I am and not what I do for the love my friends bear me. I, conscious all the time of the shortcoming of my hands, haunted ever with a sense of beauty which makes all I do and say pitiful to me, and the occasion of perpetual apologies, assure myself to disgust those whom I admire. And now suddenly it comes out that they have been loving me all this time, not at all thinking of my hands or my words, but only of that love of something more beautiful than the world, which it seems, being in my heart, overflowed through my eyes or the tones of my speech. Gladly I learn that we have these subterranean, say rather these supersensuous channels of communication, and that spirits can meet in their pure upper sky without the help of organs. Granted that my theory of the world born out of the sight of man is a false one, and that it is pedantry in us helpless and ignorant people to make this vast pretension when we do not want $1 the less, not a yard of cloth, not a loaf of bread less than other people who do not talk of their relations to the universe. Well, you do not talk of such things, but only of stocks and streets, the Cunard boats, and the politics of the new administration. Well, it is just as much pedantry in you as not to talk of that which really is there, and makes the dignity of politics and trade vis-a-vis your relation to the world. Each was a half view, granted, but one half view was nobler and therefore truer than the other. September 5th. The objection to the popular Christianity is a philosophical one. It is in the nature of things that persons can never usurp in our minds the authority of ideas. Every man is at last in his purest thought an idealist, and puts all persons at an infinite distance from him, as every moralist is at last in his purest thought an optimist. Now Christianity goes to invest persons with the right of ideas, which is absurd. Mr. W. remarked that in the courts of justice it seemed to him that the judge, the jurors, and the witnesses mutually tried each other. September 8th. We should be very rich if we could speak the truth, for, since that is the law of our progress, in proportion to our truth we should coin the world into our words. If we, dear friends, shall arrive at speaking the truth to each other, we shall not come away as we went. We shall be able to bring near and give away to each other the love and power of all the friends who encircle each of us, and that society which is the dream of each shall establish itself in our midst, and the fable of heaven be the fact of God. I went into the woods. I found myself not wholly present there. If I looked at a pine tree or an aster, that did not seem to be nature. Nature was still elsewhere. This was but outskirt and far off reflection and echo of the triumph that had passed by and was now at its glancing splendor and heyday. Perchance in the neighboring fields, or if I stood in the field, then in the adjacent woods. Always the present object gave me this sense of the stillness that follows a pageant that has just gone by. It was the same among men and women as among the silent trees. Always it was a referred existence, always an absence, never a presence and satisfaction. Thus I was looking up to nature. Afterwards I was for a season active, devout, and happy, and passing through the woods, the trees and asters looked up at me. There was I, and there were these placid creatures around, and the virtue that was in them seemed to pass from me into them. Nature is thus a differential thermometer, detecting the presence or absence of the divine spirit in man. September 10th. It was the oblique and covert way in which the good world was training to the discovery that a man must have the saintly and the poetic character, that by taste he must worship beauty, and by love of the invisible, if it were only of opinion, must carry his life in his hand to be risked at any instant. September 11th. Would it not be a good cipher for the seal of the lonely society which forms so fast in these days, two porcupines meeting with all their spines erect, and the motto, "We converse at the quill's end"? I would labor cheerfully in my gardens every day, if when I go there it did not seem trifling. It is so easy to waste hours and hours there in weeding and hoeing, and as pleasant as any other play, that I can impute to you no merit that you labor. Nothing is easier or more Epicurean. Character establishes itself and blows a grand music through whatever instrument, though it were an oat pipe or a cornstalk viol. If love be there, I shall find it out, though I only see you eat bread or make some trifling but necessary request. The reform that is ripening in your mind for the amelioration of the human race, I shall find already in miniature in every direction to the domestics, in every conversation with the assessor, with your creditor, and with your debtor. The monastery, the convent, did not quite fail. Many and many a stricken soul found peace and home and scope in those regimens, in those chapels and cells. The Society of Shakers did not quite fail, but has proved an agreeable asylum to many a lonesome farmer and matron. The college has been dear to many an old bachelor of learning. What hinders, then, that this age, better advised, should endeavor to sift out of those experiments the faults, and adopt and embody in a new form the advantage? September 12th. Sarah Clark, who left us yesterday, is a true and high-minded person, but has her full proportion of our native frost. She remarked of the dial that the spirit of many of the pieces was lonely. September 16th. The questions which have slept uneasily a long time are coming up to decision at last. Men will not be long occupied with the Christian question, for all the babes are born infidels. They will not care for your abstinences of diet, or your objections to domestic hired service. They will find something convenient and amiable in these. But the question of property will divide us into odious parties, and all of us must face it and take our part. A good man now finds himself excluded from all lucrative employments. There is so much to be done that we ought to begin quickly to bestir ourselves. Lydian says well that it is better to work on institutions by the sun than by the wind. As Palmer remarked, that he was satisfied what should be done must proceed from the concession of the rich, not from the grasping of the poor. Well, then, let us begin by habitual imparting. Let my ornamental austerities become natural and dear. The state will frown. The state must learn to humble itself, repent, and reform. A sleeping child gives me the impression of a traveler in a very far country. He can toil terribly, said Cecil of Sir Walter Raleigh. Is there any sermon on industry that will exhort me like these few words? These sting and bite and kick me. I will get out of the way of their blows by making them true of myself. The conversion of a woman will be the solidest pledge of truth and power. September 17th. I am only an experimenter. Do not, I pray you, set the least value on what I do, or the least discredit on what I do not, as if I had settled anything as true or false. I unsettle all things. No facts are to me sacred, none are profane. I simply experiment, an endless seeker with no past at my back. Every hour has its morning, noon, and night. Alcott said, "Who are these people? There is not one of them whom I cannot offend in any moment." Ah, vast spirit, I weary of these egotisms. I see well how puny and limitary they are. September 19th. Life is emblematic to every good mind and is equally profound, let the circumstances or emblems be a kingdom, a camp, a college, or a farm. It is the angle which the object makes to the eye which imports. September 20th. Can we not trust ourselves? Must we be such coxcombs as to keep watch and ward over our noble sentiments even, lest they also betray us, and God prove a little too divine? Dare we never say, this time of ours shall be the era of discovery? These have been the ages of darkness. Wide Europe, wide America lieth in night, turneth in sleep. The morning twilight is grey in the east. The Columbuses, the Vespuccis, the Cabots of moral adventure are loosening their sails and turning their bowsprits to the main. Men have never loved each other. See, already they blush with a kindness which is pure and genius. The inventor finds in love the unknown and inexhaustible continent. Love, which has been exclusive, shall now be inclusive. Love, which once called genius proud, behold, they have exchanged names. Love, which was a fat, stupid Shaker, or a Magdalen Methodist, or a Moravian, now is a brave and modest man of light, sight, and conscience. God hateth the obscure. On the last day, as on the first day, he still says, "Let there be light." Where there is progress in character, there is no confusion of sentiment, no diffidence of self, but the heart sails ever forward in the direction of the open sea. Perhaps after many sad, doubting, idle days, days of happy, honest labor will at last come when a man shall have filled up all the hours from sun to sun with great and equal action, shall lose sight of this sharp individuality which contrasts now so oddly with nature, and, ceasing to regard, shall cease to feel his boundaries, but shall be interfused by nature, and shall so interfuse nature that the sun shall rise by his will, as much as his own hand or foot do now, and his eyes or ears or fingers shall not seem to him the property of a more private will than the sea and the stars, and he shall feel the meaning of the growing tree and the evaporating waters with a more entire and satisfactory intelligence than now attends the activity of his organs of sense. Every glance we give to the landscape predicts a better understanding by assuring us we are not right now. When I am quite alone in my morning walk, if I lift up my eyes, the goodly green picture I see seems to call me hypocrite and false teacher, me who stood innocently there with quite other thoughts and had not spoken a word. For the landscape seems imperatively to expect a clear mirror, a willing reception in me, which, not finding it, lies obtrusive and discontented on the outward eye, unable to pass into the inward eye, and breeds a sense of jar and discord. The most trivial and gaudy fable Kehama, Jack Giant Killer, Red Riding Hood, every Grandam's nursery rhyme contains, as I have elsewhere noted, a moral that is true to the core of the world. It is because nature is an instrument so omnipotently musical that the most careless or stupid hand cannot draw a discord from it. A devil struck the chord in defiance, and his malevolence was punished by a sweeter melody than the angels made. There is no leap, not a shock of violence throughout nature. Man, therefore, must be predicted in the first chemical relation exhibited by the first atom. If we had eyes to see it, this bit of quartz would certify us of the necessity that man must exist as inevitably as the cities he has actually built. September 24th. Cities and coaches shall never impose on me again. September 26th. You would have me love you. What shall I love? Your body? The supposition disgusts you. What have you thought and said? Well, whilst you were thinking and saying them, but not now. I see no possibility of loving anything but what now is and is becoming. Your courage, your enterprise, your budding affection, your opening thought, your prayer, I can love, but what else? Paradise, said Mohammed, is under the shadow of swords. It is easier to distinguish the sweet apples from the sour in a multitude of human faces than it is in an orchard. In the good old women one detects at sight the saccharine principle. Perhaps it is folly, this scheming to bring the good and like-minded together into families, into a colony. Better that they should disperse and so leaven the whole lump of society. I will not be chidden out of my most trivial native habit by your distaste, O philosopher, by your preference for somewhat else. If rhetoric has no charm for you, it has for me, and my words are as costly and admirable to me as your deeds to you. It is all pedantry to prefer one thing that is alive to another thing which is also alive. The mystery of God inhabits a nursery tale as deeply as the laws of a state or the heart of a man. The soul. Do not indulge this rabble of second thoughts. Cast yourself on the hour and the man that now is, nor be such a litterateur as to cast about already for the benefits that shall accrue from this new fact to art. So is your literature thievish. The Whigs meet in numerous conventions, and each palpitating heart swells with the cheap sublime of magnitude and number. In the history of the world, the doctrine of reform had never such scope as at the present hour. Nations will not shield you, neither will books. Vain is the cumulative fame of Tasso, of Dante, vain the volumes of literature which entrench their sacred rhymes, if the passing mystic has no glance for them, not a motion of respect. Alas, too surely their doom is sealed. Lydian gives the true doctrine of property when she says, no one should take any more than his own share, let him be ever so rich. September 30th. Yes, I resent this intrusion of a few persons on my airy fields of existence. Shall our conversation when we meet, O wife or sister Elizabeth, still return like a chime of 7 bells to 6 or 7 names? Nor are we freemen of nature be able long to travel out of this narrowed orbit? Rather, I would never name these names again. They are beautiful, and therefore we have given them place, but they affront the sun and moon and the 7 stars when they are remembered once too often. Beware of walls, let them keep the open field. Douglas-like, I had rather hear the lark singing than the mouse cheep. Yet though I start like a wild Arab at the first suspicion of confinement, I have drank with great joy the contents of this golden cup hitherto. With great pleasure I heard George Bradford say that this romance took from the lustre of the reformers who alone had interested him before. I felt that what was private and genuine in these rare relations was more real, and so more public and universal than conventions for debate and these wary speculations on reform. The call of a heart to a heart, the glad beholding of a new trait of character, freedom derived from the friendly presence of a fellow being, to do somewhat we have never done, freedom to speak what I could never say. These are discoveries in the ocean of life. They are Peru's, Brazil's, and Plymouth Rocks, which to me were the more inestimable that I had been such a homekeeper and knew nothing beyond the limits of my own forest and village fair. October 5th. On Saturday evening I attended the wedding of Samuel Gray Ward and Anna Hazard Barker at the house of Mr. Farrar in Cambridge. Peace go with you, beautiful, pure, and happy friends. Peace and beauty and power and the perpetuity and the sure unfolding of all the buds of joy that so thickly stud your branches. October 7th. Circumstances are dreams which, springing unawares from ourselves, amuse us whilst we doze and sleep, but when we wake, nothing but causes can content us. The life of man is that true romance which, when it is valiantly conducted, and all the stops of the instrument opened, will go nigh to craze the reader with anxiety, wonder, and love. I am losing all relish for books and for feats of skill in my delight in this power. Do not accuse me of sloth. Do not ask me to your philanthropies, charities, and duties, as you term them, mere circumstances, flakes of the snow cloud, leaves of the trees. I sit at home with a cause, grim or glad. I think I may never do anything that you shall call a deed again. I have been writing with some pains essays on various matters as a sort of apology to my country for my apparent idleness. But the poor work has looked poorer daily, as I strove to end it. My genius seemed to quit me in such a mechanical work, a seeming wise, a cold exhibition of dead thoughts. When I write a letter to anyone whom I love, I have no lack of words or thoughts. I am wiser than myself, and read my paper with the pleasure of one who receives the letter, but what I write to fill up the gaps of a chapter is hard and cold, as grammar and logic. There is no magic in it. I do not wish to see it again. Settle with yourself your accusations of me. If I do not please you, ask me not to please you, but to please yourself. What you call my indolence, nature does not accuse. The twinkling leaves, the sailing fleets of water-flies, the deep sky, like me well enough, and know me for their own. With them I have no embarrassments, diffidences, or compunctions. With them I mean to stay. You think it is because I have an income which exempts me from your day labor, that I waste, as you call it, my time in sun-gazing and star-gazing. You do not know me. If my debts, as they threaten, should consume what money I have, I should live just as I do now. I should eat worse food, and wear a coarser coat, and should wander in a potato patch instead of in the wood. But it is I, and not my $1,200 a year, that love God. We feel that every one of those remarkable effects in landscape which occasionally catch and delight the eye, as for example a long vista in woods, trees, on the shore of a lake coming quite down to the water, a long reach in a river, a double or triple row of uplands or mountains, seen one over the other, and whatever of the like has much affected our fancy, must be the rhetoric of some thought not yet detached for the conscious intellect. Virtues are among men rather the exception than the rule. They do what is called a good action, much as they would pay a fine in expiation of daily non-appearance on parade. I do not give you my time, but I give you that which I have put my time into, namely my letter or my poem, the expression of my opinion, or better yet an act which in solitude I have learned to do. October 17th. A newspaper in a grave and candid tone censures the Dial as having disappointed the good expectation of our lovers of literature. I read the paragraph with much pleasure, for the moment we come to sense and candor I know the success of the Dial is sure. The Dial is poor and low and all unequal to its promise, but that is not for you to say, O daily advertiser, but for me. It is now better after your manner than anything else you have, and you do not yet see that it is, and will soon see and extol it. I see with regret that it is still after your manner, and not after mine, and that it is something which you can praise. Quote, The sow kens the basket maker's thumb. Scottish proverb. Go, dear soul, and be scales and sword, an accusation and a terror, a day of doom and a future to the world lying in wickedness. The fat and easy and conceited world, the cultivated and intellectual world, takes the prophets by the hand and affects to be of their part and to deplore the general ignorance and sensuality which rejects and derides them. Yet it takes a secret pleasure in the fact that this reprobation reaches not to them, instead of finding therein conviction of sin. This derision is a laurel on the brow of the prophets. This same prelacy, these men of intellect on good terms with the world, are glad to speak the sheriff and the constable fair, for they do not yet see what height and what debasement are, and that the only asylum and protection and lordship and empire is virtue. Why should I use a means? Why should I not rush gladly to ends? Yesterday, George and Sophia Ripley, Margaret Fuller, and Alcott discussed the social plans. I wish to be convinced, to be thawed, to be made nobly mad by the kindlings before my eye of a new dawn of human piety. But this scheme was arithmetic and comfort. This was a hint borrowed from the Tremont House and United States Hotel, a rage in our poverty and politics to live rich and gentlemanlike and anchor to leeward against a change of weather, a prudent forecast on the probable issue of the great question of pauperism and poverty. And not once could I be inflamed, but sat aloof and thoughtless. My voice faltered and fell. It was not the cave of persecution which is the palace of spiritual power, but only a room in the Astor House, hired for the transcendentalists. I do not wish to remove from my present prison to a prison a little larger. I wish to break all prisons. I have not yet conquered my own house. It irks and repents me. Shall I raise the siege of the hencoop and march baffled away to a pretended siege of Babylon? It seems to me that so to do were to dodge the problem I am set to solve, and to hide my impotency in the thick of a crowd. I can see too far, that I should not find myself more than now, no, not so much in that select, but not by me selected fraternity. Moreover, to join this body would be to traverse all my long trumpeted theory, and the instinct which spoke from it, that one man is a counterpoise to a city, that a man is stronger than a city, that his solitude is more prevalent and beneficent than the concert of crowds. Short note from the editor. Here follows 2 pages of fine extracts from Beaumont and Fletcher's Tragedy of Bonduca, of which 3 are given here. There's not a blow we gave since Julius landed that was of strength and worth, but like records they file to after ages. Our registers, the Romans, are for noble deeds of honor. 10 times a night I have swum the rivers when the stars of Rome shot at me as I floated, and the billows tumbled their watery ruins on my shoulders, charging my battered sides with troops of agues. Ye fools, you should have tied up death first, when ye conquered. Ye sweat for us in vain else. See him here, he's ours still, and our friend laughs at your pities, and we commanded him with as easy rein as do our enemies. The old experiences still return. Society, when I rarely enter the company of my well-dressed and well-bred fellow creatures, seems for the time to bereave me of organs, or perhaps only to acquaint me with my want of them. The soul swells with new life and seeks expression with painful desire, but finds no outlets. Its life is all incommunicable. Those who are to me lovely and dear seem for that reason to multiply and tighten the folds that envelop and smother my speech. A dandy, Mr. Paceless, calls, quote, un millefleur Judas, We need not do what we cannot. Let us go home again, home to our faculties and work. Is one associate or one circumstance unfit, in heaven I should hapless be. We use our virtues and their fruits as purchase money for our vices. Not when I walk in the streets of the city am I earning the prayers of the young and the highly endowed, but when I forget Boston and London in rapid obedience to the invisible and only Spirit. Not by wealth and a city consequence, not by skill and arts, nor by the manners and address of the world could I, if these I had, bring any gift worthy of the acceptance of friendship, but only out of a deeper magazine whereto cities and bankers cannot go, out of the realms of an unbroken peace, of loving meditation, of a habitual conversation with nature. Out of these alone can I draw the natural gold which universally commands all other goods and is royal currency of the world. I love spring water and wild air, and not the manufacture of the chemist's shop. I see in a moment, on looking into our new dial, which is the wild poetry, and which the tame, and see that one wild line out of a private heart saves the whole book. I wrote C.S. this afternoon that it is not we, but the elements, the destinies, the conscience that makes places and hours great, they the omnipresent, and if we will only be careful not to intrude or chatter, the least occasion in the domestic hour will be grand and fated. We shall one day wonder what we have ever distinguished days, or circumstances, or persons. Life only avails, not the having lived. Neither thought nor virtue will keep, but must be refreshed by new today. But we get forward by hops and skips. Shall we not learn one day to walk a firm continuous step? As nothing will keep, but the soul demands that all shall be new today, therefore we reject a past man or a past man's teaching. Who is Swedenborg? A man who saw God and nature for a fluid moment. His disciples vainly tried to make a fixture of him, his seeing and his teaching, and coax me to accept it for God and nature. Dependence is the only poverty. This is the end of part 3 of Emerson's journal collection number 31, dating from the year 1840. In the next video, we will complete journal collection number 31 and close out that year. Thank you for listening.